Yeah, man, so my purples, welcome to the black hole. My name is Blessed Beats. It is here, the battle of the champs, the two standalone units that everybody's still talking about. Which one is the best? Which one is the better? The MPC Live 2 or the Maschine Plus? I've made quite a few videos on this before. We've had some discussions with Beggs and Aiken, for example, following him to the buying store, getting it, leading up to the event in time where he decided to part ways with it and trade it in for a Maschine Plus instead. I've had the first MPC Live, the MPC One, of course all the Maschinas. You know I'm a Maschine head, so I'm a partially biased toward the Maschine Plus. You should know that coming in here. But the thing is, the flavor is like the bud. It is divided. So when people ask me which one should I pick, it is way too complex to break it down based on that little sentence alone, you know what I'm saying? So many different variables that have to do with the way that you prefer to work that makes it impossible for me to break it down based on just that, you know what I'm saying? So I decided this is the first time that I have both of the machines in my possession right here. I have the MPC Live 2 and the Maschine Plus. I have the luxury of having them both. Most people, I realize, do not have that luxury of being able to have them both. I can right now, so god damn it, I will. But I'm going to try to break some things down that I haven't seen in other videos out there, just to give a clearer picture for you. Maybe make that decision a little bit more easier for you. The startup time, that can be fun to see. Boom, there we are. Almost the same. MPC Live is not too far behind there. They take a little while to boot up, but booting up your computer is probably going to take even longer. And let's face it, why would you need, what type of life-threatening situation is it that you're going to be in where this will matter? I don't know. First, let us briefly touch upon the build and feel of these machines. Both of them are really superb quality, very professional feeling. This one has a thick plastic, you know what I'm saying? And this one is also a thick plastic, but actually has some aluminum components to it, like these knobs right here are light aluminum.
Aluminum, smart ass.
Q-link sliders, they feel great.
Yeah, aluminum, I know.
These knobs feel a little bit more great. The resistance in them is a little bit greater, but I cannot complain about either one of them. Also, very satisfying click in the jog wheel here. The Maschine jog wheel is a little bit different. It's a more clicky, but it also serves as a four-way joystick. So in a lot of cases, for example, in these channel menus, you can nudge them, or in the events, if you have some note information here, you can select these, you can nudge them around using this joystick here, which comes in handy. But overall, they both have a very satisfying touch to them. All these buttons here, there's an initial rubber soft touchdown, and then a satisfying click at the end that is not too mechanical and hard feedback. MPC Live 2, I would say also even a little bit more satisfying rubber touch. The initial rubber touch of these buttons here is a little bit even more satisfying to press them. And these things are important. It might be a little bit geeky. We might be overanalyzing here. Are we here to make music, or are we here to, you know, masturbate? But I think these things are important, the tactile feel of these things. When it comes to the layout of them, we're going to dive into the architecture in just a minute. But I think the Maschine Plus wins here because you have one dedicated button for almost everything here. If you got the MPC One, there's a few more dedicated buttons, but there's also shortcuts. So for the menu, for example, if I hold down menu, you see we have 16 options here. All these pads, they correspond with these options. So for example, if I wanted to go into the track menu, I can just press pad 6 there. So it's not a big issue, you know what I'm saying? There's a little bit more menu diving in general on the MPC than on the Maschine Plus, but it's not that notable. Where it does become notable is in the architecture, the way that everything is built up, the way you structure banks of samples and the way you sequence on them. But I think both of them are very well designed for what they are. I mean, the MPC is staying true to its origins, the original OG structure of sequencing, while the Maschine has a completely different approach to it. This is what's hard to explain in theory, so we're going to get into that. First, let's talk about the pads for a second here. These pads, they feel like some regular ass MPC pads. And I say that with the best intentions, in a good way. MPC pads are good for those that want to smash the pads. If you really love to smash them, you have that solidity there. On the other hand, if you want to be more gentle and have that soft touch, maybe for playing some type of other sounds that are not, you know, drums that you're smashing really hard, it's not as sensitive as the Maschine Plus. Maschine Plus, on the other hand, is a little bit more all-round. You can touch it really gently like this and it will pick right up on it. But you can also choose to smash it and it's going to handle it. It feels almost like it will not handle it though, because this one is a thicker rubber. It's a thicker rubber material with a little bit more bounce to it, a little bit more recoil. Worry not, however, the Maschine can take a beating. It's just a sensation there. So if you're somebody that really loves to smash the pads, I would probably pick the MPC Live 2, especially if you're a finger drummer, you know what I'm saying? Let's talk about the sound management, because these do differ a lot from the Maschine Plus to the MPC Live 2. Let's start with the Maschine Plus right here. What I really love about the Maschine Plus is the tagging system. Let's hop into the menu here. Everything is so neatly organized. So if you're using Maschine expansions or anything that's compatible with the Maschine, you have everything beautifully sorted for you. The first way you can filter your sounds is by projects, groups, sounds, instruments, effects, loops, or one-shots. So if I wanted to load up an entire group, the next step we can filter by is which expansion pack do we want to look in. Let's say we want to look at the faded reel ones. Now we're filtering out entire groups only from the faded reels kits. From there we can filter it down even more to kits, acoustic, melodic, percussion, urban, vinyl kit. Boom. That's as deep as it goes for that one. But let's take a look at instruments instead. Here is where it's so beautiful from a bread and butter standpoint. When you're already a little bit into your beat and you have an idea in your head of a sound that you want right then and there, chances are you're probably going to find it just by filtering out really quickly. Bass synth, bowed strings, brass, drums. Let's go with a synth lead, for example. From there, you can filter it down even more. Classic mono synth, classic polysynth, other soft synths. So down to even a character. All of these sounds are tagged for you to be able to filter it down to exactly what you need. And that is what I think is the beauty about the file management on a Maschine Plus, where it doesn't really translate in the transition from Maschine being a hybrid of software and hardware to a standalone unit is managing your own samples. Let us pretend I didn't have any of my own samples on there. Now, I have a USB stick with some samples on it. This is one way that you can access them. They have actually fixed it so you can use a USB stick now, but there's a downside to it and you will see in just a sec. Check them out. I'm going into the browser here. Now, if I want to browse anything that's related to my own sounds that doesn't have anything to do with Maschine expansions or Maschine plugins, I'll have to check this user thing here. Now, if I go into my one-shots menu, you will see my USB stick that's named sounds pops up here. All right, so far so good. Let me go check them out. Okay, so you'll notice here that this is not a traditional file browser. The folders will be assigned to these filtering knobs right here. And you cannot have unlimited levels of, like you can't have files that are 10 folders deep. For example, let me check what folders I have in here. Okay, I have grime wave folder. See, I have to keep it that way. I can only go 2 or 3, I think 3 folders deep. And a lot of times you might want to organize, if you have a USB stick that's full of sample libraries, you might have one that's, okay, the first folder is the name of the sample pack, for example. The second folder is whether it's drums or instruments or percussion or something else, some other category like that. Okay, that's another folder that you wasted. And then the third one might be, let's say we're in the drums folder. Now it's kicks, snares, hi-hats, etc. That is one more. And that's as deep as you can go. You can't have more folders than that. I would prefer it if there was a way to just, if there was also a regular ass file browser on here. Next con in this is the way it's so beautifully tagged everything in here with the factory sounds, with the expansions that you get and the plugins. You can do that with your own sounds as well, but that means you're gonna have to do it in the Maschine software, tag them, and then import them into the Maschine standalone. And there you just have a lot of pre-work there, a lot of management. You might have to take a day or two, depending on the size of your sample library and what you want to use, to prepare it just to have that smoothly and readily available. Let me eject that and show you another way that you can transfer samples, project files, and what have you to your Maschine Plus. You can actually go into settings and go into storage mode right here. Boom, that will put it into USB mode. And if we have a look at the computer or the data device, we get access to the SD card. And here's another thing. The operating system and all the samples, they're stored on an SD card here on the side. When it comes to CPU performance, a lot of it is dependent on that. So you need to make sure that you have the most ultra fast SD card for the best performance, you know what I'm saying? We're gonna get into that later also. However, let's say I wanted to put some samples in here. I would need to make sure that I go into the user content folder. Now I can drag and drop a sample there. Ejaculate the drive. And now we should be able to access it from the library. You would then find it under the user content folder. The bank will have the same name as the folder you dropped it in, and now you can access it. So it's not perfect, it's not the whole world. At the same time, I haven't had any major problems with it. I just think it's a little bit annoying that you can't have the options of both browsing it as a regular file browser and in this beautiful tagged system that they made for themselves. At the same time, I understand that it's hard to marry the logic of the two. Now let's have a look-see at the MPC Live 2, how that works. MPC Live 2, browser. Now, you can see there are significantly less ways of filtering your samples. You can basically only filter it by file type. Drums, that'll be drum kit files, an entire kit that you load up, a program as it's called in the MPC world. Instruments is another type of program. It's an instrument program. Clips are essentially audio clips. Samples, which would be the equivalent of one-shots, any file, or splice. Synchronize. That's a beautiful thing. If you're a frequent splice user, you can sync your splice samples directly with your MPC. All you need to do is set your Wi-Fi up and sync it. I don't use it that much personally, but I know a lot of people do. So that might even be a tipping point decision maker for you. I don't know. Once you have them synchronized, it kind of, with the splice samples, it makes up for it because it automatically makes a folder system for all your samples. Since the splice samples are all tagged in the metadata, you can browse them by a folder like this. So you can browse them by key, and you'll have folders for all the keys that your samples, existing samples are in, by instrument, basically any tag that the splice samples are tagged by. This is not the same for the Maschine samples, the Maschine samples and programs that are in the expansions though. There are no meta tags. So we can browse by expansion, for example, and then we go in here. What we would have to do is actually search it just like any regular file browser. So there is a drawback to having the regular browser like that, is that you don't get the beautiful tagging that you get in the native instruments world. Also, arguably, this is not a huge deal. You can type it in on the touchscreen like this. Kick. And now I can browse all the kicks that are within that expansion. If I wanted to browse, for example, my SD card that is in here, I can just go to places, press my SD card. Now, clear out this field here. And I can browse the folders that I can organize whichever way I want. For example, if I wanted to check out my own sample packs right here, we can go into the down to the sound kit and instantly preview them like that. That is something I should mention that has to do with performance also. If you have a lot of samples loaded up in the user content folder on the Maschine,
your mother should know. Your mother should know.
Sometimes you'll come across these bigger samples and scrolling them can be a little bit slow. That is significantly better now than it was before. But don't be surprised if you catch a little slowdown here and there browsing your samples when it's streaming directly from the SD card or the USB stick. Way you can solve that is by just turning off the automatic auditioning of the samples, the pre-hear here. Then you'll be able to scroll away faster than the speed of light, you know what I'm saying, but you cannot hear the sounds at the same time. Another thing that kind of sucks about it is you would expect maybe this magnifying glass to bring up a prompt where you can search by typing in, but there's no way to do that. So you will have to find it by filtering. So there, you know what I'm saying? I think the pros and the cons kind of even themselves out. It depends a little bit how you organize your samples from the beginning and how you like to structure your workflow, you know what I'm saying? But it's a good thing to know. Now I'm going to try to break down the difference between the architecture on these two devices for you. It's a little bit complicated to say. First, let us look at this graph right here. Okay, so I'm going to load up the same sample on both of these. Let's begin with the Maschine. The Maschine is a little bit more everything within arm's reach. You know what I'm saying? You have these groups here, and they all contain 16 samples or sounds, which also double as tracks at the same time. These groups also contain the patterns. So the way that you structure sounds is going to be completely different. You're not limited to these 8 groups. As a matter of fact, you can just go on for eternity. Creating new groups, more groups than you'll ever need. But it's a little bit easier to manage when all the patterns that use these sounds live within the group, and also all the tracks that you sequence live within the pad. So this is the sound that we hear here, and it's also the track. Let me just show you. Let's bring up the screen here. Let's set the tempo to what the sample is, and I'm just gonna pop it in there. See, now we're sequencing. Now we made our first pattern there, and this pattern lives within this group. This sound, which also lives in this group, doesn't need to be assigned to a track because the pad also doubles as a track at the same time. So you don't need to think about managing that. That will always be in the same place. It will be on track 1 or sound 1, because there's not even a thing such as tracks, but you can think of it as a track that lives on the same pad as the sound. And this is going to be very confusing at first if you're coming from a DAW on the computer or from the MPC. This concept is a little bit different. It can be tricky to wrap your head around. Looking at doing the same thing on the MPC Live 2 here, there's already 3 layers to it, where there was 1 layer to it on the Maschine. So we have our sample here. Okay, so first we have 8 pad banks here. Our sample lives in pad bank A of this program. So the first thing you'll have to do is set up your program. There are several different types of programs that you need to keep track of. You can have a drum program, which is what this is right here. In this case, once we have this sample, we will attach it to the drum program. Then we will go in and edit all the parameters of this program, the polyphony of the entire program, the pitch of the entire program, mute groups, sample editing, envelopes, filters, you name it. Every parameter lives within this program. And it is a very flexible way, but it adds a few more layers of complexity to it. So now that our sample lives in program 001 right here, we can actually rename it if we want to be even more tidy. And we want to begin to sequence it. We need to first keep track of which sequence are we on. We're on the number first sequence. Let's set the BPM up there. Now we need to select which track we're on. We're on track number 1. We need to select which type of program should this track have. It has a drum program. The other types are plugin program, instrument program, clip program, MIDI program, or CV program. On a Maschine, it doesn't matter. Any group, any sound within any group can be any type of program. If you would translate it, you can have a VST plugin here, a one-shot sample there, an audio clip there, you name it. It is more flexible within the group like that. So now that we selected which type of program this track is going to host, we have to select which program it's going to host. And we only have one drum program right here, which is a sample drum program. Okay, now we're good to go. Now we can start sequencing it. This, along with also having to set up before how many bars you want it to be. While if we make a new pattern right here on the Maschine, we can actually have it automatically extend for however long we want, you know what I'm saying? Depending on how you see it, it might be more flexible, but it can become problematic because you have to think ahead of time. You have to organize and be a lot more aware with how you organize things on the MPC. Because, for example, you can make a new track and have the same drum program on there. And you can see here already here, it can become a little bit confusing because now you got two tracks, but we hear the same sample. And we're like, why is this sample being triggered? So we have to go looking through the other tracks. And once you get up to 18, 19, 20 tracks, you'll need to make sure that you're always sticking to the same track because you might be working on one sequence here and you're adding a bunch of tracks, but you've already started working on sequence number 2 and you have 10 tracks on sequence number 2 while you added 8 new tracks on sequence number 1. Now, when you want to start to replicate that, you're going to either have to go in and one by one copy this node information, copy these events from this sequence to sequence number 2, copy all of the events from track 13, for example, and do that one by one, which becomes a hell of a cumbersome thing. The way that I work around this is, number 1, always be very sure that you're naming your tracks so you can make sure you're sequencing your samples to the same track and be consistent with that. And also, I tend to stick with one sequence and build and stack the entire thing up before I start making new sequences because it can just become a clusterfuck of a hell to keep track of things later if you make something that's a little bit more complicated. On the Maschine, everything is always tied together, so you don't really need to think about keeping track of things like that. A pad contains a sound. That same pad is also the track for the sound. It always lives in the same group, and all of the patterns, they live inside of the group as well. So once you have a couple of these patterns, once you have a couple of these groups, now instead of a sequence with multiple tracks, we have a scene with multiple tracks. So you can mix and match these patterns that all live within the groups and make different variations of them. And once you make a new scene, all you would really need to do is change the pattern on that one. And it's also flexible in the way that if you've made more patterns, but you've been in other scenes while you make these patterns, the scenes are the equivalent of sequences pretty much, you'll have instant access to all of these new patterns that you made, and you simply would have to go in and add them to the new scenes if you wanted to. And this is a little bit weird to wrap your head around if you're not used to it. At the same time, if you have been using the MPCs for 20 years, you know exactly how it works. You know that's the way, that's the logic, that's the way it goes. And it's not going to be a problem at all for you. I was on MPCs 10 years before I switched over to the Maschine. It was a little bit confusing at first, but once I wrapped my head around it, it was so much more flexible. This layout right there, that architecture can also become a little bit confusing when it comes to, for example, mixing right here, because there's many different layers to it. For example, on this mix screen right here, we see the different programs here laid out, and we can adjust the volume, the pan, the effects for those. It will be global for the programs. On a Maschine, it would just be directly on the group here. We have our sample there. We can go to the group and we can add an effect to there, or we can go into the mixer and adjust the volume and the pan of it. That's really all you need to keep track of. Here, you can adjust it on a program level. So our sample is on this program right here. We can add 4 effects to it. But there's also the return menu, the submixes, the masters, audio tracks, MIDI tracks, and there's another mix menu where you can do it individually for each pad in the program right here. Until you get used to that, you're probably gonna fuck a thing or two up, you know what I'm saying? Same thing when it comes to the mutes. You can go in and mute a program or a track, and you can also mute a sample. I mean, it's to become quick and efficient at that, it takes some time to get used to it and wrap your head around. While on a Maschine, it's like, okay, I want to mute the sounds that are in this group. Fuck you, bye-bye. I want to mute this sound that is in this group. All right, I'll go to this group and I'll mute that sound. And it's much more immediate in that way. There's really no valid purpose of the complexity of the architecture of the MPC other than to make it fit the mold of the classic MPC workflow. This, in my opinion, is just a more modern way of tackling it and making it make sense, where you have everything in one box, in one standalone box, and there's a lot to keep track of, so you want as little things as possible to keep track of while maintaining this immediacy of grabbing out and touching it just 1 or 2 pushes away. That is really the biggest difference between the two. That is the biggest difference of all, and that is the only reason why I prefer the Maschine over the MPC, because there's other stuff that the MPC does way better. Let us dive into some more shit. Sound library. In my opinion, the sound library that comes with the Maschine Plus, it is way better than the MPC, although there are some very great expansions for the MPC Live, and after all, they're both samplers, so you know, you stuff it with whatever you want to put in there. But let's talk about the synthesizers on this one. We have access to some great plugins here. Contact libraries. There's the massive Synth, which is still incredible and holds up to this day. The Monarch, which is a mini Moog essentially. Prism, Reactor, and Retro Machines, just out the gate like that. And there's some pretty superb synths. Let's load up something from Massive in here. Say a bass. B-Low 2, that's a great 808 preset to begin with. Here comes a problem though. There is no GUI. And the way that the Maschine is built, we are probably not going to see a visual interface for these plugins in this version of the Maschine, unfortunately, which makes it a bitch, let's be honest, to make your own sounds or to even edit it. I mean, you can find your parameters in here, but right now we're in the Massive plugin. We have 16 pages of parameters. 16 pages. If you already have some experience with Massive, you'll know how everything is laid out, and you'll know that, okay, typically it's envelope 4 that's assigned to the basic, you know, like the attack. You can find the parameters that you want to in there, and it's fully fledged. I mean, it's the full version of Massive. It is the engine is exactly what it is on the computer. But making your own sounds from scratch, you can just forget about that. It's not fun. It's just not fun. While on the MPC, let me introduce you to another type of program, which is the plugin program. We have at our disposal 3 different synth plugins and a whole bunch of drum synth plugins as well. We'll take a quick look at that later, but let's load up the bass line right here. And now if we want to go in and edit this, we can go into program edit, and we have a beautiful GUI, a graphical user interface, which makes it so much easier to make your own patches. There's a whole lot of good presets here. So it's much easier to edit it here, but let me show you a drawback here. If we switch this synth plugin for the tube synth instead, something that is a little bit boring about this is it's limited to 4-note polyphony. So you can't make those fleshy, you know, 8-note chords with this plugin alone. Although it has some great sounds and it's much easier to edit it. If we go into chords mode here, for example, yeah, that is the drawback. So on the Maschine, you have way better sounds. You have much more powerful plugins, but you're a little bit limited when it comes to editing, making your own sounds from scratch, or even modifying them exactly how you want them to. It will take a little while to browse around there because it's not quite as intuitive as having a graphical interface on the MPC. Better library, better presets, shitty editing. Not as good library, not as good presets, limited polyphony, but easier to edit. You can make up for this by getting the mini school that me and Cashman made, which is actually a modified version of Massive, where the parameters are laid out in a more intuitive way from A to B. And you can get this on my website, where you can just load up one of these init presets, mono. There's 5 different mono presets, 5 different poly presets, and if you load up any one of these, we've laid out the configuration so it's much more intuitive. Start off with the first oscillator, move on to the second oscillator, sub oscillator, noise, filter, feedback, filter envelope. And you can get quite advanced with your sound design, but it still has a way more intuitive layout. There's a secret thing coming up for the update, but right now I think this is the best option that you have for designing your own sounds from scratch, if that's what you're into. The drum synths on the MPC are really dope. And the Q-Link sliders work really well here. You just click somewhere for where the area of parameters you want to edit, and the 4 Q-Links will always be. Where you want them to, and that drives us into the next territory, which is the touchscreen. But before we talk about the touchscreen, let's talk about the sample editing. We have already loaded up a sample here, same sample on both of them. Let me show you first on the Maschine what editing samples is like. First of all, you have all the parameters. They will pop up on your screen immediately once you select the sample that you want to be at. Like I said, the sense of immediacy. I press this pad, I get the parameters that I want to see for that pad. So we have the polyphony for it. We have the type, whether it's a one-shot AHD or ADSR envelope, and then followed by a shitload of other parameters. MPC, select your program, go into the program. In here, there's some quick sample editing parameters, layering of the samples, etc. And while there's a sample editor that is attached to the program edit, there's also another sample editor that's separate from that one. And this can be a little bit confusing at first. There's one tab right here where you do think of it as a little bit more destructive, or it's like your sample editing workshop, while on the program tab you will edit parameters that are specific to the program it's assigned to. So there's a lot of menus and stuff you can get caught up in. On the machine, you have the sampler. This is the sampler. You record your samples on the first tab, you edit your samples on the second tab. This is the immediate sample edit part. So if we wanted to, for example, manually edit our sample, I have never experienced a faster way of doing that. You can just duplicate your sample right here. We'll set them up to the same choke group right there. That's just one menu deep. Set both of them to that. And now that we duplicate it, all the parameters will be duplicated also. Zoom in and navigate on the right screen right here. Edit your start and end points on the first with the first knobs on this screen. You can get the selection range here and just take a selection and do any of these edit functions here. So it's very immediate and hands-on, and that you have all of these 8 knobs out here. This is why I don't like the micro, because you really don't get that immediate touch. It's like you have the samples in your hands. It also has a slice modes with a couple of different modes, like the manual mode, which is very dope. Yeah, that was terrible. You do it manually with time like that. MPC also has that. There's a threshold mode that it detects, and you set the sensitivity. MPC also has that. There's a split mode where you split it into even parts. The MPC also has that. And there's a grid mode where you also split it into slices according to a BPM. So in terms of editing, right here you have everything you need. And there's 2 different ways actually. Now, the manual chops I did right here, they actually take up now this real estate in this group. So they take up 8 pads or 8 sounds. That's half of the group right there. So, but another thing that you can do is if you chop it up, for example, with one of the slice modes right here. Let's use the manual mode here. Remove all the slices. All right, that's our slices. And now that we apply these slices, we get the option to select which pad we want to assign it to. And this is because when we select one of these here, we go out into the pad mode to see all of our pads. We have all of our chops contained within one of these pads here. So now we can actually dive into this by pressing keyboard and going all the way down in octaves, because it's laid out as if it was on a keyboard. It would be C-1, like the lowest key. C-2, I'm sorry. Now we have all the chops laid out there. So there's a lot of possibilities how you want to arrange your samples and how you want to organize them, you know what I'm saying? But what I prefer about the machine is this immediacy of editing the samples just by pressing the pad you want to edit, and there you have it. You're editing it, and you have both the start and the endpoints and the zooming and the navigation on the screen. Everything is there on the same spot. You just have to know which group is your sample in, which pad is your sample on, press it, and you're there. It's a little bit more complex on the MPC. You would have to navigate to the sample that you want to edit, and if you have a lot of samples in here, it can be a cumbersome thing depending on what mode you're in. Therefore, I prefer to chop my samples directly from the program edit. So in the program edit, we can just press the pad, and now we have instant access to accessing them. But from here, we can't access all the fancy chopping modes and shit. For that, we need to be in the sample edit mode. And from here, you can click the trim menu, and we have basically the same ways of chopping it. The manual one. Alright, so now we have our chops there, and we can edit the start point or the end point. We have to actually switch with the fucking Q-Link button here to switch between the start and end points, and these will define how fine the tuning of the start or the end point is. So we can do it. Pro of this is you can use the touch screen to zoom in, but I actually don't think, or you can use the zoom here, but I actually think it's a little bit faster on the machine to just use this. Anyways, once you have your chops, you can press shift and convert these. And then you would either need to make a new drum program, which you then assign to a track and then sequence from there. Or you can assign specific slices to pads. There are more steps to it. There's no way of getting around that. One pro though is you can customize the Q-Link knobs here. So you could actually set it up to control both the start and the end point and do it a little bit quicker that way. I prefer to just do it from the program edit, because then you can duplicate the pads just as you do on the machine. Like, let's put that one there. And now we can go in and start to edit. Then you might also want to set the polyphony of your entire program, or set the mute groups up so they mute each other. So as you can see, it is rather quick to do it on the MPC 2. This is a little bit more complicated, and I don't experience just the same hands-on control of feeling like the sample is in my hands and I'm shaping it as I do with the machine. Of course, someone who has more experience with the MPC will feel the complete opposite way if they sit down at the machine and they haven't learned it. But trust me, I have spent my fair share of time with the both of them. The differences once you learn it are so minuscule that it's not going to be, a deal breaker, put it that way. But I do think Maschine wins in this. On the other hand, there are other ways of dealing with your samples on the MPC. Like, for example, since you have all of your samples assigned to a program, there are global program parameters that you can manipulate here. For example, if I wanted to change the tuning of the entire group, I can do it from here. That you would deal with that on a machine in a somewhat different way. You would just select all of them and then go So it doesn't have a global tuning for this group, but you can easily select all of the samples and change any parameter of them at the same time, which you can also do on the MPC here. Could the touchscreen be a deal breaker? I find that the touchscreen does make things a little bit faster on some occasions, like for example, selecting multiple notes like this and being specific with it. But that's really about it. On the Maschine, if I wanted to select all 4 of these notes, I would press select, I will select an area, or I would just press the notes that I want to select, and that's it. I mean, it's not that much slower. It does make up for having less knobs though, because as I showed you before, for example, in this plugin right here, you can just press whatever selection you want to edit and you're editing those parameters. But the Maschine kind of makes up for that by having more knobs. And the layout of everything is so well designed that, you know, the knobs always control what they need to control when you're in a certain menu. So I never really feel like I want to reach out and touch the screen. I would think another one occasion is typing things. For example, if I wanted to save this project, I'll hit save as, and I'll just type the name in with the touchscreen, blah, 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 and it's pretty quick. But on a Maschine, if we want to save this, for example, it's way faster than typing with a PS4 controller. If you ever tried YouTube on a PS4, it's just horrible typing it in. Since it's a 4-directional joystick / a scroll wheel, it's just really fast. We can even go in here and rename this group to sample, for example. Done. That's it. I mean, it's a little bit faster with a touchscreen, but the touchscreen versus non-touchscreen, because of the way that these things are designed, this makes sense to have a touchscreen with. This, not so much. It's a non-issue. So we can drop that now. Stability. Let's grab that dragon by the tail, alright? Because when the Maschine Plus came out, it was notorious for its instability. It was crashing left and right. I would not want to make a beat on it because I was afraid of losing it. And you still have to, you be cautious around it. But it's more about the responsibility of not overloading the CPU is kind of in your hands with this one. If you have too many plugins in there, they're pretty CPU intense. If you have many different plugins of different kinds, or if you have groups that have very long chains of effects on them, you will easily overload them and get these sound buffer issues, and it's not ideal for a live situation. I don't know even at this point if I would dare to take it to a live situation, which might be a big point for someone to buy this. And some of these groups, for example, let's take one that is notorious for this, crate cuts. For some reason, most of these kits are just smashed to the brim with effects. So look at this is the group channel, right? These are the effects that are on the entire group. Lo-fi, filter, chorus, phaser, metaverb, grain delay, perform effects, grain stretch, compressor, limiter. And then we go down to the sound level, and imagine that these are 16 different sounds in here. Let's take a look at what we have on them. All right. Actually, not so much in this case, just a few compressors. But you'll find other groups when you load up that have like 8 to 16 effects on one sound. And then imagine having that many effects on each sound in one group. That is gonna smash your CPU pretty quickly once you have a few of these groups loaded up. So no matter how you sugarcoat it, it doesn't matter. The CPU does not handle as much as it should be for you to be able to comfortably use this in any situation where it doesn't matter if you get a little buffer sound every now and then. The MPC, however, it kind of polices you. For example, let's go into the mix here and go to the insert effects for this first sample right here on the first pad. We can only have 4 insert effects on one pad. Then you can add another effect to the group, or to the program, I mean. Sorry, I'm getting confused here, caught between these two worlds. But also there, only 4 effect slots. And let's talk about the effects. That's the next part there. Both of them really have everything that you need. The MPC has some great delay and reverb effects on it, great dynamics effects, good compressors, good EQs, good filters, and some more artistic choices like distortion, frequency shifter, lo-fi talkbox, tube drive, decimator, you know, for lo-fi effects, modulation stuff like ensemble, flanger. It has everything you need, and the same goes for the Maschine. The effects on here, they're really good. Compressor, gate, transient master, limiter, maximizer, EQ, filter, cabinet, chorus, flanger, frequency modulation, frequency shifter, phaser, eyes, metaverb, reflex, reverb, beat delay, grain stretch, reso chord, distortion, lo-fi, saturator. On top of that, every sample has some quick effects on it, like the things that you would typically need: compressor drive, sample rate reduction, bit rate reduction, and 4 different types of filters just for quick effects for one sample. And you would apply these effects either to the sound, to the group, or to the master. There, it's not much of a competition, you know what I'm saying? You can achieve the same results with either one of them. The Maschine has to perform effects that you can apply to a group. So, for example, we can add a filter, flanger, burst echo, reso echo, ring, stutter, tremolo, scratcher. Get the stutter right here. And get some cool effects for each one of the groups here. The MPC has its own version of that, which is called XY effects. So you can double tap this to access that. And you can apply these effects to the program. And it's got a wide selection right here of beat, repeat, low pass filter, phaser, flanger. And it works kind of like a Korg Chaos pad. The mandatory tape stop is there. And you can apply these to a program, which you apply to a track, which you apply to a sequence. So there, like I said, the main difference between the two is the architecture, and which one of those two you prefer, that is up to you. We can go in and talk about all the technical aspects like the inputs and outputs. There are tons of videos for that. That is not for me. These are the points that I think really separate the two from each other. But we have one last topic to cover, and that is the standalonability. There's a few different reasons why you might want a standalone machine. If you're at your computer all the time anyways, it doesn't really make sense because it will be powerful enough. I mean, performance-wise, none of these are really up to par with what is in a computer ordinator device nowadays. So you will have to live with some limitations. And if you're going with the expectation that you want to replace your computer, you're going from a DAW where you have literally limitless possibilities, and you want to go to something like this and expect it to have functionality and performance that is at the same level as a computer. We're not in that type of future yet, or we might be, but it would be even more expensive to get one of these devices. Your decision is going to depend a lot on what you're trying to do with it. I see a lot of people, they just want to replace the computer. They want to get away from the computer, and they want to use these for tracking out and making entire songs, recording vocals and everything. You can do it on both of them. For example, the 8 audio tracks you have in here are on the MPC. They're great, and they're cool for little sketches and stuff. You could even make entire songs on it if you wanted to, but it's not even comparable to a computer ordinator device. The Maschine, since they introduced the clips in the song view here, you can easily lay out the structure of your entire song by making a few scenes, arranging it like this, making variations in the patterns, and then hopping into clip mode and using one of the groups here to record, for example, some guitar or some vocals, and then being able to flexibly move it left and right across here. But it doesn't get close to a computer ordinator device. I rarely experience any crashes anymore on the Maschine Plus since the latest update. Well, the MPC Live, it does just randomly crash on me and restart a couple of times since I got it. So I think on stability, I think you need to treat these two devices. Don't expect to replace a DAW with any one of these two machines. Treat them like they're supposed to be. They're groove boxes, all right? Even something like the looping capabilities. it has some great potential there. This could be the greatest looper in the whole world. I made a couple of videos about that. You could either resample internally or sample from an external source and sync it up. The looper in the Maschine right here is very flexible because you can have takes either stacked up on the same pads, or you can, you know, make multiple tracks and then easily build up a whole song right there, then and there, or make the patterns from those takes and make variations of them. The looper on the MPC is a little bit more rudimentary. You can record one track, you can overdub that track, and then you can export it. You can reverse it, but that's about it as advanced as you can get, and then you can export it to a pad and use it from there. So it's not as intuitive with building up songs. However, as a one stereo track looper, what is the pro of the looper on the MPC Live is you can actually hop in and overdub stuff once you have something recorded anywhere. This one, you'll have to be... I'll show it to you. We're playing it, right? You have to kind of time it right to start at the right place. Recording is working. That's right. It's working. Well, if I wanted to hop in at any time, it's not going to automatically sync it. And you know, it is so close to being the perfect looper of all, like better than the RC505s. But there are a couple of workflow issues there, like you have to always time when you press and start the recording. You can't hop in anywhere and it'll automatically lock into the tempo that you set. Now, hopping back to the standalonability, there's a couple of different reasons. You might just want to get away from the computer and have another inspiring environment or whatever, or you want the portability aspect of it. The Maschine Plus, as of now, I think they kind of missed out on that aspect of it. People were just yelling for a standalone machine. When is a standalone machine coming? And it'll do it. It'll do the trick for if you want to just have it in the studio. But as a portable device, having a built-in battery and a speaker on top of that, like the MPC does, it really does a lot, man. It does a heck load of a lot. I have this one tethered with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cables to it. It is stationary. It's in its place. This is my most trusted, like this is my right hand guy right here. Unplugging everything, plugging in headphones, an external battery, and it just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. It stays there. It stays where it is. I work on stuff here when I'm in the studio with the Maschine. The MPC Live, it is very friendly to just bring it out in the couch, in the living room, in the bed, in the toilets. And that's little small convenience that I really underestimated before, of having a built-in speaker or a built-in battery, so you don't have to worry about that. That can sometimes be the tipping point there for the paradox of choice, to chime in and say, you know what, it's a little bit more convenient. I'm just going to work on this when I bring it with me. So portability wise, the MPC Live 2 100% wins. The Maschine, it works great as a standalone device, but not really as a portable device. I mean, there's some decision-making factor there that puts a stick in the wheel for me. Plus, I feel like I have to be a little bit weary, a little bit cautious with it, you know what I'm saying, because of the certain instability factors that don't really matter that much when you're in the studio and working on something and you make sure that you save it. But if I'm live, I don't want to bring this. No, I don't want to bring it as it is right now. I'm really hoping for a next version of the Maschine Plus that has the built-in speaker and the built-in battery and is a little bit more stable and has graphical user interfaces that will really make up for that last mile of extreme usability. You know what I'm saying? So for me, I'm not going to say which one of these is better. I'm just not going to say that. I prefer the Maschine Plus. You make your own decision. I hope I clarified a thing or two and made it a little bit easier for you. if you haven't tried them both. I really do suggest heavily though that you give them a whirl yourself before you make a decision. And that is the last video I will ever make about this. Hopefully we can let it go now. Even though it's fun, I enjoy having both of them. I make some sketches on the MPC Live 2, and I will lift them into Ableton Live, or I'll continue working on them in the Maschine Plus. You know what I'm saying? I like to keep a little bit of variation, but they are both very expensive machines. So if you're on the road a lot and you don't have a computer at hand, I would say pick the MPC Live 2. If you want something that is both works standalone and is a great hybrid, because that is what it really did best in the very beginning. That's the only reason why I even switched to Maschine in the first place, is because it was a perfect marriage between computer ordinator device world and a controller with everything so within arm's reach and tactile, almost as if you can touch the sound. Maschine does a better job at that. Thank you for watching. Big up to all my patrons. Ring that notification bell if you haven't. Smash that like. It really helps out. Always remember, number one for the love and the fun. Okay, bye-bye.